My sister-in-law excluded me from the family trip photos I paid for, so I left the luxury room bill for her to pay. I'm going to tell you about the time I publicly humiliated my sister-in-law during a vacation I paid for, and honestly, I'd do it again without hesitation. My name is Bryn, I'm 47 years old, and this whole mess started when my father-in-law got some devastating health news that changed everything for our family. Some people might think what I did was petty or cruel, but those people didn't spend an entire week being systematically excluded and treated like an unwanted outsider while bankrolling a luxury vacation for 7 people. So before you judge me, hear me out, because I promise you'd have done the same thing in my position. My husband and I were sitting in our living room one evening when he got the call from his mother. I could tell from his face that something was terribly wrong. He went pale, his hand started shaking, and he kept saying, "Okay," and "I understand," in this hollow voice that made my stomach drop. When he finally hung up, he just sat there staring at nothing for a long moment before he could even tell me what had happened. His father had been diagnosed with a serious heart condition, and the doctors weren't optimistic about his long-term prognosis. They'd given him maybe a year, possibly 2 if he was lucky and took care of himself. The medications could only do so much. His heart was failing, and there was no reversing it. My husband was devastated. His father was only 73, which felt too young, too soon. They'd always had a close relationship, the kind where they talked on the phone several times a week, where my father-in-law called my husband for advice on technology, and my husband called him for advice on everything else. The thought of losing him was crushing. The old man, stubborn as they come, and fiercely independent his whole life, had one wish that he shared with his wife. He wanted to return to the coastal town where he and his wife had spent their honeymoon 50 years ago. He was terrified this would be his last chance to see it again, to walk those beaches one more time where they'd walked as newlyweds full of hope and dreams, to eat at the restaurants they'd visited when they were young and in love, and had their whole lives stretching out before them. The nostalgia and fear in that request broke my heart. When my husband told me about it, his eyes filled with tears, his voice breaking as he explained what his father wanted. I didn't even hesitate. I reached over, grabbed my husband's hand, and told him firmly that we'd make it happen, no matter what it cost. Money wasn't an object here. This was about giving a dying man one last beautiful memory, one last chance to revisit the happiest moment of his life. How could we say no to that? We started planning the trip within days. My husband and I are fortunate to be in excellent financial shape. I work as a senior operations manager for a regional logistics company, and he's a software engineer for a major tech firm. Money wasn't going to be an issue for this trip. The plan was simple. We'd take his parents to that coastal town, book a beautiful resort, and give his father the trip of a lifetime. I found a gorgeous place right on the water and booked the best suites available. Then my sister-in-law entered the picture, and everything got significantly more complicated. She called my husband crying, begging to come along with her 3 young children. She'd married young to a man who worked in construction, and they struggled financially. 3 kids, mounting debts, and constant stress had taken a toll on their marriage. When she heard about the trip, she saw it as a rare escape from her difficult life. My husband looked at me with those puppy dog eyes, and I knew what he was asking. "Absolutely," I told him without hesitation. "Your father should have his whole family there. Of course they can come." So instead of 4 people, we were now 7. I paid for everything. 7 round-trip plane tickets, 3 hotel suites at this gorgeous beachfront resort, all meals, activities, everything. The total cost was over $15,000. But I didn't care. This was for my father-in-law. From the moment we arrived at the resort, I should have seen the signs. In the lobby, my sister-in-law organized a family photo. She positioned everyone, then looked at me and smiled. "Can you take the picture for us? I want one with just the original family." I smiled and took the phone, feeling the sting of exclusion. After I handed it back, my mother-in-law squeezed my arm. "You're such an angel for paying for all of this." My sister-in-law rolled her eyes so dramatically I thought they'd get stuck. The next day, we went on a boat tour along the coast, a beautiful sunset cruise with dinner included. I'd specifically requested this tour because it went past landmarks my in-laws remembered from their honeymoon. When we got on the boat, my sister-in-law immediately directed everyone to their seats. She put herself next to my husband in the front row, positioned her kids around my in-laws, and managed to arrange things so that I ended up sitting alone in a completely different row, separated by another family of tourists. My husband gave me an apologetic shrug, but didn't rearrange anyone. So I sat there, isolated, watching my family enjoy the cruise together, while I might as well have been on a different boat. The boat had a professional photographer who came around taking pictures of each party. When he got to our group, he naturally assumed I wasn't with them since I was sitting so far away. He took several shots of them clustered together, laughing and enjoying the golden hour lighting, while I sat in the background like a stranger. The photo he printed as a souvenir showed my entire family together while I sat alone in the corner, barely visible. When I saw it, something inside me cracked. My sister-in-law made a big show of buying the photo, cooing about how perfect it was. That night, I tried to talk to my husband about how I was feeling. We were getting ready for bed, and I approached it gently. "I feel like your sister is deliberately excluding me from things," I said. "The photos, the seating arrangements, it feels intentional." He sighed and sat down on the bed. "That's just how she is. She's always been a little possessive of family stuff. Don't take it personally." How am I not supposed to take it personally when I'm the one being left out? Look, I know it's frustrating, but can we not make a big deal about it? My dad is sick. This trip is for him, and I don't want any conflict. My sister didn't mean anything by it. She's just excited to have everyone together. I wanted to scream that everyone wasn't together if I was being systematically excluded, but I bit my tongue. He was right that this trip was about his father, and I didn't want to ruin it, so I let it go. The next evening, I had made reservations at an upscale seafood restaurant overlooking the ocean. When we arrived, my sister-in-law rushed ahead and took the seat next to my husband, forcing me into a spot wedged between my father-in-law and the service station. Throughout dinner, she dominated every conversation, talking exclusively about childhood memories. I picked at my expensive seafood, but this time something was different. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was just done. Completely. Utterly done. I looked at my husband, waiting one last time for him to say something, to do something, to acknowledge what was happening. He gave me that same apologetic smile he'd been giving me all week. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity. Nobody was going to save me from this situation. Nobody was going to stand up for me. Nobody was going to set boundaries on my behalf. I would have to do it myself, and I knew exactly how. After dinner back at the hotel, I confronted my husband more directly. "Your sister is being cruel," I said flatly. "This isn't just her being excited or possessive. She's deliberately making sure I don't feel like part of this family." He ran his hands through his hair, looking exhausted. "I need to tell you something. When we first got engaged, I was 35, you were 34. My sister tried to convince my parents that you were a gold digger. She told them you were only with me for money, that you'd take everything and leave." I stared at him in shock. "And you're only telling me this now?" My parents didn't believe her. They shut her down immediately. But she's never really gotten over it. She resents that they love you, that you're successful, that we're doing well. He paused, looking uncomfortable. "And there's more. My mom told me something else today. Apparently my sister had a whole plan for this trip." "What kind of plan?" "She was going to ask you for money on the last day. A loan, she'd call it, but really a gift because she could never pay it back. She figured that after you'd paid for everything and been in all the family photos, you'd be too invested to say no. She thought she'd backed you into a corner where refusing would make you look cruel to my parents." I sat there processing this, my mouth hanging open. That's why she kept excluding me from photos. Exactly. If you weren't in the family photos, it would be easier for you to say no when she asked. But she couldn't have it both ways. She couldn't exclude you all week and then expect you to hand over thousands. By leaving you out, she actually made it easier for you to set that boundary at the hotel. He looked at me with something like pride. Her plan backfired spectacularly. And honestly, I'm glad it did. And you're okay with that? You're just going to let her treat me like garbage because she's petty? "My dad is dying," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm asking you to please just get through this week without causing a scene. I know it's not fair. I know she's being terrible. But I can't deal with family drama on top of everything else right now." I wanted to argue, but the pain in his eyes stopped me. So once again, I swallowed my anger and agreed to keep the peace. The next day was supposed to be a spa day. I had booked appointments at the luxurious resort spa, hoping it might be a chance to bond. Then my sister-in-law made her suggestion. "You know, maybe Bryn should stay back with Dad on the beach while we 3 girls go to the spa," she said sweetly. "He shouldn't be alone. Right, Bryn?" My mother-in-law looked uncomfortable. "We can all go together. The hotel has staff who can sit with him." "No, I really think Bryn should stay," my sister-in-law insisted firmly. I looked at my mother-in-law, hoping she'd stand up for me, but she just looked away. Nobody was going to fight this battle for me. "Of course," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I'd be happy to keep Dad company. So I spent the day on the beach with my father-in-law while my sister-in-law enjoyed the spa treatments I had paid for. He was a sweet man, always had been, and we had a lovely conversation. He told me stories about his life, about meeting his wife, about building his business from nothing. And then he said something that made me tear up. "You're the best thing that ever happened to this family," he said, patting my hand. "My son is so lucky to have you. I hope you know how much we appreciate everything you do." I squeezed his hand, fighting back tears. "Thank you. That means everything to me. My daughter," he sighed, and I knew he was talking about my sister-in-law. "She's always been jealous of what other people have, never satisfied with her own life. I'm sorry if she's been unkind to you." So he had noticed. He knew exactly what was happening, and it broke my heart that he was apologizing for his daughter's behavior while he was supposed to be enjoying what might be his last vacation. He looked so tired, so frail sitting there in the beach chair, and yet he was still worried about me, still trying to make sure I felt included and valued. That night, I sat alone on our balcony while my husband slept. The ocean stretched out before me, dark and vast under the moonlight, waves rolling in with their eternal rhythm. I looked out at the water, at the moonlight creating this silver path across the surface, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to cause a scene during the trip. I wasn't going to ruin this week for my father-in-law, who had so few good days left. But I also wasn't going to let my sister-in-law continue treating me like garbage without any consequences whatsoever. She thought she could exclude me, isolate me, make me feel like an outsider, and then still expect me to pay for her luxurious week. She thought I'd just swallow it all and smile and keep writing checks. She was wrong. I was going to wait until the very last moment, and then I was going to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. Not through confrontation or drama, but through a simple, clear boundary. She wanted to treat me like I wasn't part of the family? Fine. Then she could pay her own way like the outsider she'd positioned me to be. The last day of the trip arrived, and I woke up with absolute clarity about what I needed to do. My hands were steady as I got dressed, and I felt calm in a way I hadn't felt all week. This wasn't about revenge, not really. This was about setting a boundary, about showing my sister-in-law that her behavior had consequences. I told my husband to take everyone to the airport ahead of me. "I need to stay behind and settle the hotel bills," I explained. "There's some tax stuff I need to sort out with separate receipts. You go ahead with your parents and the kids, and I'll meet you at the airport." He looked at me carefully, like he was trying to read my expression, trying to figure out if something was brewing. "Are you sure everything's okay?" "Everything's fine," I said, and I meant it. "I just need to take care of this. I'll see you in a few hours." He kissed me goodbye, and I watched from the balcony as they all loaded into the shuttle van. My sister-in-law was organizing the luggage, bossing everyone around, completely oblivious to what was coming. Once they were gone, I went down to the hotel reception desk. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady when I spoke to the manager. "I need to separate out the bills for each suite," I said. "Can you please give me individual invoices?" The manager hesitated, and my heart stopped. "May I ask why?" "We normally need to do this before checkout." "Tax purposes," I said, trying to keep my voice calm while my pulse raced. "I need everything itemized separately for my accountant. Is that going to be a problem?" He considered for a moment that felt like an eternity. "Well, since all guests are technically still registered until noon checkout, I can make an exception this time." Relief flooded through me. If my sister-in-law had been more organized, if she'd actually checked out properly before leaving, my entire plan would have failed. But she'd been too busy bossing everyone around with the luggage to worry about details like hotel checkout procedures. Sometimes people's own carelessness works in your favor. He nodded and started working on his computer. Within minutes, he had printed out 3 separate bills, one for each suite. I looked at them carefully. My bill and my husband's was reasonable, mostly just the room rate since we hadn't used much else. My in-laws' bill was slightly higher because they'd ordered room service a few times, and my father-in-law had used the hotel's medical services for his medication. Then I looked at my sister-in-law's bill, and I had to suppress a smile. It was astronomical. Over $4,800. Daily room service, multiple spa treatments, the minibar completely emptied, resort babysitting services for the kids, expensive meals at the hotel restaurant, special kids' activities, late checkout fees, everything. She had lived like an absolute queen for the entire week, racking up charges like she was a celebrity on someone else's expense account. Which, of course, she was. She'd assumed I was paying for all of it. "I'll pay my bill and my in-laws' bill right now," I told the manager, handing him my credit card. "But for Suite 214, I need you to leave that account open and contact the guest directly to settle it." The manager's eyebrows went up slightly. "Are you certain?" "The bill is quite substantial." "I'm certain," I said firmly. Please call the guest and ask her to come down to reception to take care of it. He made the call while I stood there. I heard him speak politely into the phone, asking my sister-in-law to please come to the front desk to resolve an urgent billing matter. Then I settled into a comfortable chair in the lobby, crossed my legs, and waited. This was going to be good. My sister-in-law came rushing into the lobby 15 minutes later, slightly out of breath, clearly expecting some kind of minor billing error that could be quickly fixed so she could get to the airport. She was already in her travel clothes, her bag over her shoulder, her kids' backpacks hanging off her arms, ready to head out and probably thinking this was just a quick formality before leaving. "What's the problem?" she asked the manager with a smile. That same fake sweet voice she'd been using all week whenever she wanted something. "Ma'am, we need to settle your account before you depart," he said professionally, sliding the invoice across the marble counter with a neutral expression. She picked it up, glanced at it casually, and her face went completely white. I watched from my comfortable chair, not saying a word, just observing every micro-expression that crossed her face. The confusion, then the shock, then the dawning horror as she realized exactly what she was looking at and what it meant. Her hand started shaking as she held the paper, her eyes scanning the itemized charges over and over like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "This can't be right," she said, her voice shaking slightly with panic starting to set in. "This must be a mistake. There's no way I spent this much." "I assure you, ma'am, everything is accurate and itemized," the manager said calmly. "Those are all the charges that were billed to your suite during your stay with us. You can see each item listed individually with the date and time." She looked around the lobby desperately, and her eyes landed on me sitting there calmly watching her. She walked over quickly, the invoice clutched in her trembling hand like it was a bomb about to explode. "Bryn, there's been some kind of error with the bill. Can you just take care of it like you did everything else? And we'll sort it out later?" I smiled at her pleasantly. "That's not my bill to pay. That's yours. You'll need to settle it with the hotel." "What are you talking about? You paid for the whole trip." "I paid for the trip I agreed to pay for," I said calmly. "I paid for accommodations, travel, and basic expenses. I didn't agree to pay for you to treat this place like your personal playground. Everything on that bill is extras that you chose to charge to your room. That's your responsibility." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "But I don't have this kind of money. I can't afford this." "Then you probably shouldn't have spent it," I said simply. She stared at me in disbelief, then turned back to the manager, who was waiting patiently behind the counter. I watched as she dug through her purse and pulled out a credit card with shaking hands. "Can I do this in my room?" she asked quietly, clearly trying to avoid a scene. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we need to resolve this before you leave the property. It's hotel policy." She slid the card across the counter, turning slightly as if to hide the transaction from passers-by. The machine beeped. Declined. She fumbled for a second card, her discretion already crumbling. Declined. When she reached for the third card, her hands were trembling so badly that it fell from her fingers and clattered onto the marble counter with a sound that echoed through the lobby. People stopped walking. Declined. "I'm sorry, ma'am, that card was declined. Do you have another form of payment?" Her face was now bright red, a deep crimson that spread from her neck to her forehead, and I could see other guests in the lobby starting to notice the scene unfolding. People were glancing over, whispering to their companions, clearly intrigued by this woman having what was obviously a very stressful moment at the front desk. The manager maintained his professional composure, but I could see even he was getting uncomfortable with how this was playing out in such a public space. She fumbled desperately for another card, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped her wallet. She tried that one, declined with that same harsh beep. A third card, also declined with no hesitation from the machine. None of her credit cards had anywhere near enough available credit to cover the bill that she'd so carelessly racked up over the past week. Every single card was maxed out or close to it, confirming what I'd suspected about their financial situation. "I need to call my husband," she said, her voice rising with barely contained panic, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Of course, ma'am. You can step over there for privacy," the manager said graciously, gesturing to a quiet corner of the lobby near the decorative plants. But there was no privacy. Not really. The lobby had excellent acoustics with its high ceilings and marble floors, and I could hear every single word of her conversation from where I sat. I'm sure other guests could hear it too because the lobby had gone noticeably quieter as people tuned into the drama. "Hi, honey. I need you to do me a huge favor," she started, trying desperately to sound casual and calm, like this wasn't an emergency. Her voice was tight and strained despite her attempt at normalcy. I couldn't hear his responses, but I could infer them from her half of the conversation, from the way her face kept contorting with different emotions, from the defensive tone that crept into her voice more with each exchange. I'm at the hotel and there's a small problem with the bill. Pause. No, Bryn didn't pay for everything like I thought. Longer pause, and her voice got defensive. I didn't spend that much. I just got a few spa treatments and ordered some room service. Another pause. Well, the kids needed entertainment, so I signed them up for some activities. Her face was getting redder and redder. I could tell her husband was getting angry. It's not that much, she protested, but her voice was shaking. Okay, fine, it's more than I expected. But what was I supposed to do? We were at a resort. More angry talking from his end. She glanced over at me, pure hatred in her eyes, then turned away. Can you just transfer me the money? Please? I'll explain everything later, but I need to pay this now or I'll miss my flight. Pause. Clearly him saying they don't have that kind of money sitting around. I know we don't have that much in savings. Can you put it on our credit card? Another pause. Him explaining their cards are also maxed. Then use the emergency fund. Please, I'm standing here in front of everyone and I can't leave until this is paid. The conversation went on for almost 30 agonizing minutes. She begged, she pleaded, she promised she'd explain everything. Swore she hadn't realized the costs were adding up so much. Insisted it wasn't her fault. Other guests were definitely watching now. This drama playing out like a reality show in the middle of an upscale hotel lobby. Some looked sympathetic to her. Others looked annoyed by the noise and disruption. A few seemed entertained by the spectacle. The hotel staff was trying to be professional, but I could see them glancing over periodically, clearly uncomfortable with the prolonged scene. My sister-in-law was close to tears, begging her husband to find the money somehow, promising she'd work extra hours, saying she'd sell things, whatever it took to pay him back, even though we all knew that would never happen. Her voice got increasingly desperate, increasingly shrill. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of public humiliation, her husband apparently agreed to transfer the money. She gave the manager her banking information, and we all waited while the transfer processed. When it finally went through and she was able to settle the bill, she looked absolutely destroyed. Her hands were shaking as she signed the receipt, and she couldn't meet anyone's eyes. She walked past me without a word and headed straight out the door to get a taxi to the airport. I followed at a leisurely pace, taking my time, knowing that we were all booked on the same flight and there was no way she could avoid me. The taxi ride to the airport was silent and incredibly tense. My sister-in-law sat as far away from me as possible in the back seat, staring out the window. Her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. I gazed calmly out my own window, feeling more at peace than I had all week. When we got to the airport, things got even better. My sister-in-law hadn't done early check-in for her flight because she'd been too busy enjoying the resort on my dime. Because we'd had to delay leaving the hotel to deal with her bill, we were now running late. The rest of the family was already through security, waiting at the gate, while she had to deal with getting boarding passes for herself and 3 young children. Can I help you, ma'am? The agent at the counter asked. I need to check in for flight 642, my sister-in-law said, sounding frazzled. I'm sorry, but check-in for that flight closed 20 minutes ago. You'll need to speak with the gate agent about getting on. But my family is already on the plane. I understand. Ma'am, but you'll need to hurry. The gate is closing soon. I had already checked in online, so I breezed past the ticket counter and went straight to security. I'd also managed to arrange some upgrades the night before, a little surprise I'd been saving. When we all finally made it through security and to the gate, the boarding had already started. I handed my boarding pass to the agent. Oh, you're in first class, she said brightly. You can board now. My husband looked surprised. First class? I upgraded us, I said with a smile. You, me, and your father. I thought we should be comfortable on the way home. I'd actually arranged those upgrades 2 nights ago, the same night I'd decided what I would do at the hotel. It had cost an extra $500, but watching my sister-in-law's face twist with rage at that moment made every cent worth it. His mother smiled at me gratefully. His father squeezed my hand, and my sister-in-law's face twisted with pure rage as she realized she and her 3 children would be sitting in economy while we enjoyed spacious seats and complimentary drinks up front. Why didn't you upgrade all of us? She hissed. Because I paid for your basic ticket to get you here, I said calmly. How you get home is how you get home. Your seat is toward the back. You should probably board now before they run out of overhead space. She looked like she wanted to hit me, but there were too many witnesses. Instead, she grabbed her kids and stomped onto the plane. The flight home was peaceful in first class. My father-in-law slept most of the way, exhausted from the trip, but with a smile on his face. My husband held my hand and didn't say anything about what had happened at the hotel. He knew. He knew exactly what I'd done, and while he probably didn't love the method, I could tell part of him was relieved that someone had finally stood up to his sister. When we landed and collected our luggage, the whole family reconvened in the arrivals area near the baggage claim. My sister-in-law immediately went to her parents with this desperate energy, tears already streaming down her face before she even opened her mouth, launching into a dramatic and increasingly hysterical recounting of how I'd humiliated her at the hotel. She was nearly shouting at points, her voice echoing through the airport terminal, causing other travelers to stop and stare. "She's cruel and manipulative," my sister-in-law sobbed loudly, her voice cracking with emotion. "She did this on purpose to hurt me, to embarrass me. She knew I couldn't afford it and she set me up to fail. She forced me to beg my husband for money in front of strangers. She excluded me from first class deliberately. She's trying to turn you all against me. She wants to replace me in this family. She's trying to make me look bad so you'll love her more than me." Her accusations were getting more wild and desperate with each sentence. Other travelers were definitely watching now, this scene of family drama playing out in the middle of the airport. Some looked sympathetic to her. Others looked annoyed by the noise and disruption. I just stood there calmly, letting her speak, knowing that the truth would come out. I expected my in-laws to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay, to maybe even give me disapproving looks for causing such a public scene and family conflict. I was prepared to defend my actions if needed, had my arguments ready. Instead, my mother-in-law cut her off sharply, her voice firm and carrying authority that silenced my sister-in-law immediately. "That's enough," she said firmly. "I warned you before this trip. I told you explicitly not to disrespect the person who was paying for everything. I told you to be gracious and kind, and you promised me you would be." My sister-in-law's tears stopped abruptly. "What are you talking about?" "I saw everything you did this week," my mother-in-law continued. "The photos where you excluded Bryn, the seating arrangements where you isolated her, the conversations where you deliberately talked about things she couldn't participate in, the spa day where you pushed her out. I saw all of it, and I said nothing because your father is sick and I didn't want to ruin his trip. But don't you dare stand here and play the victim now." My father-in-law nodded in agreement, looking disappointed and tired. "You should be grateful for what you received, not angry about what you had to pay for yourself. Bryn gave us all a beautiful gift by organizing this trip. Your behavior was unacceptable." My sister-in-law looked between her parents in shock. This clearly wasn't going how she'd expected. She'd thought they'd take her side, comfort her, make me the villain. Instead, they were both standing firmly with me. "I can't believe this," she said, her voice breaking. "You're choosing her over me?" "We're not choosing anyone," my mother-in-law said. "We're simply pointing out that your behavior had consequences. You treated Bryn terribly all week, and she responded by not paying for extras that were your responsibility. That seems fair to me." "Fine," my sister-in-law said, her voice hard with anger and humiliation. "Then I don't need a ride home with any of you. I'll figure it out myself." "Don't be ridiculous," my father-in-law said. "We'll all go together." "No," she said stubbornly. "I'm not getting in a car with her." My husband tried to reason with her, but she wouldn't budge. Her pride was too wounded, and she was too angry to think rationally. So we loaded our luggage into my father-in-law's car and left her standing there at the airport. Her 3 kids stood there looking confused and tired, the youngest one starting to cry softly. I felt a pang of guilt. They were innocent in all this, just children caught in the consequences of their mother's choices. But sometimes kids bear the weight of their parents' mistakes. It's not fair, but it's reality. And I knew that lesson too well myself. I found out later that she'd had to call her husband to come pick them up, adding another hour of waiting to her already terrible day. The drive home was quiet. My father-in-law fell asleep in the passenger seat. My mother-in-law sat in the back with us, occasionally squeezing my hand supportively. My husband stared out the window, processing everything that had happened. When we finally got back to our house and were alone, just the 2 of us in our quiet living room, he turned to me with a serious expression. "We need to talk about this week," he said, his voice heavy. "Yes, we do," I agreed, my heart pounding because I didn't know which direction this conversation would go. We sat down on our couch, and I told him everything that had been building up inside me. How I'd felt from the very first photo in the lobby. How hurt I was that he hadn't defended me even once. How lonely the trip had been despite being surrounded by his family. How every meal felt like torture. Every activity felt like I was intruding. I told him that I understood he was dealing with his father's illness and didn't want conflict, but that I needed him to stand up for me, to protect me, to make sure I was treated like an actual member of the family. He listened to everything without interrupting. Really listened, his face showing the weight of what I was saying. When I finally finished, there was a long moment of silence. Then he apologized. Really, truly apologized. Not just a quick sorry and move on, but a genuine acknowledgement of how he'd failed me, how he'd let me down when I needed him most. I was a coward, he said, and I could see tears forming in his eyes. I knew what she was doing, and I let it happen because I didn't want to deal with it. I saw her exclude you from that photo in the lobby, and I said nothing. I saw her isolate you on the boat, put you in a different row, and I just shrugged at you like there was nothing I could do. I let her dominate dinner conversations and push you out of the spa day. I've spent my whole life managing my sister's moods, tiptoeing around her jealousy, playing mediator and peacekeeper, and I let that pattern continue even when it meant hurting you, even when it meant letting my wife be treated like garbage by my own family. He ran his hands through his hair, looking more distressed than I'd seen him in years. That's not okay, he continued. That's not the husband I want to be. That's not the partner I promised to be when we got married. I told you I'd always have your back, and then when it actually mattered, I let you down completely. So what changes now? I asked, needing to know this wasn't just words. Now I set boundaries, he said firmly, his voice strengthening with conviction. I've been enabling her behavior for too long, making excuses for her, asking everyone else to accommodate her instead of demanding she behave like an adult. She crosses lines constantly because nobody ever stops her, because I never stop her. Well, I'm stopping her now. What you did at the hotel, leaving her to pay her own bill, that was fair. That was appropriate. She made choices, and she dealt with the consequences. I should have been the one protecting you all week, setting those boundaries from day one, and instead you had to protect yourself in the most dramatic way possible, because I left you no other choice. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I believed him. I could see in his eyes that he meant it, that something had shifted. The trip had been a wake-up call for both of us. Over the following weeks after we returned home, my sister-in-law tried multiple times to reach out to her parents, to repair her image, to somehow spin the narrative so she was the victim in all of this. She called, she texted, she even showed up at their house unannounced trying to plead her case. But my in-laws shut her down every single time, refusing to let her rewrite history. They'd seen too much with their own eyes, witnessed too many deliberate cruelties, and they weren't willing to pretend otherwise just to keep the peace. She called my mother-in-law crying one afternoon, going on and on about how unfair I'd been, how I'd deliberately set her up for failure, how I'd humiliated her in front of strangers at the hotel, how the whole thing was cruel and vindictive. She painted herself as this innocent victim who just wanted some quality family time and had been blindsided by my heartless refusal to pay for charges she'd innocently accumulated. My mother-in-law's response was blunt and unequivocal, delivered in that tone mothers use when they're done with their child's nonsense. You humiliated yourself, she said flatly. You spent money you didn't have on luxuries you didn't need, treated Bryn like garbage all week when she was being nothing but generous, and then expected her to bail you out without any accountability. She didn't set you up. You set yourself up. You made your choices, and now you're dealing with the consequences. Take responsibility for your own behavior instead of blaming everyone else. She tried a different approach with her father, calling him separately and playing on his sympathy in a way she'd perfected over the years. She reminded him tearfully that she was struggling financially, that she had 3 young children to feed, that I had plenty of money and could easily afford to help her. So why couldn't I have just been generous and kind like families should be? She tried to frame it as me being selfish and petty, punishing her for being poor, using my wealth as a weapon against someone less fortunate. My father-in-law, despite his weakening condition, was even less sympathetic than my mother-in-law had been. His response was firm and clear, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Bryn was generous, he told her with that quiet authority he'd always had. She paid for your entire family to have a vacation you could never afford on your own. She spent over $15,000 so you and your children could have a beautiful week that will stay in their memories forever. Instead of being grateful for that incredible gift, you spent the week systematically excluding her from activities, isolating her from family moments, making her feel unwelcome and unwanted. And on top of that, you racked up nearly $5,000 in extra charges that you had no intention of paying yourself. You owe her an apology, not the other way around. And you owe her gratitude, not resentment. The most interesting fallout was in her own marriage. Her husband was furious with her, absolutely livid in a way that apparently shocked everyone who knew them. They're still together, barely, but I heard they've been in marriage counseling ever since. The anger wasn't just about the money. Although $4,800 was devastating to their already precarious financial situation and would take them months or even years to fully recover from, it was about the betrayal, about the lies, about what the money revealed about her priorities and her character. He'd stayed home that entire week working overtime, picking up every extra shift his boss would give him, working weekends, doing whatever he could to help keep their family afloat financially. He'd stayed home eating cheap takeout and instant ramen while taking care of their house and wondering how his wife and kids were doing on this special family trip. Meanwhile, she'd been dumping their 3 young children with resort babysitters who charged $50 an hour, getting $200 spa treatments, ordering $100 bottles of wine to her room, eating expensive seafood dinners at the resort restaurant, while the kids ate chicken nuggets alone watching television. She'd literally paid strangers to watch their children so she could pretend to be a wealthy woman for a week, living a fantasy life on someone else's dime, and then expecting that same someone to cover the bill without complaint. And when the bill came due, she'd called him in a panic, forcing him to drain their emergency fund, the money they'd been saving in case the car broke down or someone got sick or he lost his job, money they desperately needed for actual emergencies, gone in an instant to pay for her week of pretending to be someone she wasn't. They had a massive, explosive fight that lasted several days, with him sleeping on the couch and barely speaking to her except to express his disappointment and anger. According to my mother-in-law, who heard it from a mutual friend, he seriously considered leaving her. He felt betrayed, taken advantage of, manipulated, and he was questioning everything about their relationship. Was she always this selfish? Had he just not seen it before? Did she ever really appreciate anything he did for their family? Or was she just constantly resentful that he couldn't give her the lifestyle she wanted? I felt a small twinge of guilt, but then I remembered every time she'd excluded me, and the guilt evaporated. She'd made her choices. I maintained complete distance from her. When she tried to text me a half-hearted apology that read more like she was sorry she got caught than sorry for what she'd done, I didn't respond. When she tried to call, I let it go to voicemail. My husband supported my decision completely. He told his sister that if she wanted to have any kind of relationship with us going forward, she needed to do some serious self-reflection about her behavior and come back with a genuine apology and changed actions, not just words. About a month later, there was a family dinner at my in-laws' house for my father-in-law's birthday. It was a milestone he honestly wasn't sure he'd reach when he first got his devastating diagnosis, and even though he was getting noticeably weaker and more tired with each passing week, his skin taking on that grayish pallor that comes with serious illness, he wanted everyone together one more time. He specifically requested that all of us be there, the whole family, because he knew his time was limited and he wanted to see everyone gathered around his table while he still could. I was honestly hesitant about going, my stomach churning with anxiety at the thought of seeing my sister-in-law again. I wasn't sure if I could handle the tension and awkwardness, the barely concealed hostility, the forced politeness that would surely characterize any interaction between us. But my husband promised he'd protect me this time, swore he'd learned his lesson and wouldn't leave me to fend for myself again. He looked me in the eyes and told me that if his sister said or did anything inappropriate, he'd shut it down immediately. Consequences be damned. I believed him because I could see the change in him since the trip, the way he'd started standing up to her in their phone conversations, the way he'd stopped making excuses for her behavior. When we arrived at the house carrying the birthday cake we'd picked up, the atmosphere was immediately tense. You could physically feel it the second we walked through the door, like walking into a wall of ice. My sister-in-law was already there with her husband and kids, having arrived early to help set up. She barely acknowledged me when we walked in, didn't make eye contact, just gave this tight, barely perceptible nod in my general direction that couldn't even really be called a greeting, then immediately turned her attention back to the table she was setting with excessive focus. Dinner was awkward in that particularly painful way that family dinners can be when there's unresolved conflict simmering just below the surface. Conversation was stilted and careful, with everyone meticulously avoiding certain topics like minefields. We talked about the weather, about the kids' schools, about completely neutral subjects that couldn't possibly trigger any conflict. My father-in-law sat at the head of the table looking tired but happy to have everyone there, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand or his wife's hand, savoring what he knew might be one of his last family dinners. My mother-in-law kept trying to keep the discussion light and pleasant, asking cheerful questions about work and upcoming plans. But there was an elephant in the room that nobody wanted to address directly, a tension that made every bite of food hard to swallow. The kids sensed it too. My sister-in-law's 3 children sitting quietly and eating without their usual chatter and energy, picking up on the adult tension even if they didn't understand the cause. About halfway through the meal, my sister-in-law looked across the table at me. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I could see something brewing there. Anger, resentment, the urge to lash out. I tensed, wondering if she was about to explode, if we were going to have to relive the whole airport scene in front of my dying father-in-law at his own birthday dinner. Instead, she looked away, jaw clenched tight. It was my husband who finally broke the tension. He put down his fork with a deliberate clink that made everyone look up. "We need to talk about what happened," he said firmly, looking directly at his sister. My sister-in-law's face flushed. "I don't think this is the time or place." "It's exactly the time and place," my father-in-law said quietly, his voice weak but determined. "This family isn't going to heal if we keep pretending everything is fine when it's not." My sister-in-law looked around the table, realizing she was cornered with no escape. "Fine. What do you want me to say?" "I want you to acknowledge that you treated Bryn terribly during the trip," my husband said, his voice steady and clear. "I want you to apologize for your behavior. And I want you to understand that if you ever treat my wife that way again, you'll have a much bigger problem than an unexpected hotel bill. I'm done enabling this." "I was just trying to have time with my family," she said defensively, her voice getting shrill. "Is that such a crime?" "Bryn is your family," my mother-in-law interjected sharply. "She's been part of this family for over a decade. She's my daughter-in-law, your brother's wife, your children's aunt. When you exclude her, you're not preserving some pure original family. You're just being cruel to someone who's only ever been generous to you. You all act like she's so perfect," my sister-in-law burst out, her voice breaking. "She has money, she has a career, she gets to travel and do whatever she wants. I'm drowning in debt with 3 kids and a husband who works construction. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch her just throw money around while I'm clipping coupons and shopping at discount stores? While I'm wearing the same clothes I wore 5 years ago because I can't afford new ones?" There was a moment of heavy silence. Finally, my mother-in-law spoke, her voice cold. "So this is about jealousy." "Of course I'm jealous," my sister-in-law shouted, tears streaming down her face now. "I'm jealous that you like her more than me. I'm jealous that she's successful when I had to drop out of college. I'm jealous that she can afford to pay for vacations that I'll never be able to give my own children. But I thought maybe on this one trip, it could be about us, about the family that existed before she came along, about me getting to feel special for once instead of being the poor, struggling daughter who can't keep up with everyone's expectations." It was the most honest she'd been, and for a moment I actually felt a flicker of sympathy for her. I understood what it felt like to struggle, to feel less than. But then I remembered that her solution to those feelings had been to systematically exclude and hurt me all week, to make me feel small so she could feel big. "Your jealousy doesn't justify cruelty," my father-in-law said gently. "We understand that you're struggling. We know your life is hard, but Bryn didn't create those problems, and punishing her for having a different life isn't fair or right." My sister-in-law looked down at her plate, tears sliding down her cheeks. But she didn't apologize. She didn't take any real responsibility. She just sat there crying, and I realized she probably never would truly understand what she'd done wrong. The dinner ended shortly after that. Everyone was emotionally drained, and my father-in-law needed to rest. As we were leaving, my mother-in-law pulled me aside. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said. "I know it wasn't easy." "I came for your husband," I said honestly. "And for my husband, not for her." She nodded. "I understand. Just know that we see you, we appreciate you, and we consider you fully part of this family, no matter what she thinks or says." That meant more to me than she probably realized. A few weeks later, my husband came home from work with an interesting piece of information. He'd been talking to his mother, who had been talking to an old family friend, who had let slip something my sister-in-law had apparently confided in her. "So, apparently," my husband said, sitting down heavily on the couch, "my sister had a whole plan for that trip." "What kind of plan?" I asked, sensing this was going to be good. "She was going to ask you for money. A loan, she would have called it. But really, it would have been a gift because there's no way she could have paid it back. She'd decided that after you'd paid for the whole trip and been in all these family photos, you'd be too invested to say no. She thought she'd backed you into a corner where saying no would make you look petty and cruel to my parents." I sat there processing this information, feeling anger and vindication wash over me in equal measure. That's why she kept excluding me from photos. Exactly. If you weren't in the family photos, if you clearly weren't really part of the inner circle, It would be easier for you to say no when she asked, but she couldn't have it both ways. She couldn't exclude you all week and then expect you to hand over thousands of dollars. By leaving you out, she actually made it easier for you to set that boundary at the hotel. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The irony was too perfect, too delicious. So I accidentally ruined her manipulative plan by not paying her hotel bill? You didn't accidentally do anything? My husband said with a smile, pride evident in his voice. You saw exactly what she was doing. Maybe not consciously, but you felt it, and you responded perfectly. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself when I wouldn't do it for you. The knowledge of her intended manipulation made me feel even better about my choice at the hotel. I hadn't just set a boundary. I'd unknowingly dismantled a calculated attempt to extract money from me by using family obligation as leverage. Her whole strategy had backfired spectacularly. Over the next several months, the family dynamic slowly settled into a new normal. My sister-in-law and I maintained a polite distance. We were civil at family gatherings, but never warm. We didn't pretend to be friends or sisters. We were simply two people who shared connections to the same family, but had no real relationship of our own. My husband kept his promise about setting boundaries. When his sister made snide comments, he shut them down immediately. When she tried to plan family events that conveniently excluded me, he refused to participate unless I was explicitly included. He became the protector I needed him to be, and our marriage grew stronger because of it. My father-in-law's health continued to decline steadily over the following year, just as the doctors had predicted. We visited as often as we could, sometimes weekly, spending time with him in his favorite chair by the window, listening to his stories, holding his hand, making sure he knew how much he meant to us. He got weaker with each passing month, but his spirit remained strong. Despite all the drama with my sister-in-law, despite the tension that never fully went away, he never expressed a single word of regret about that last trip to the coast. In fact, he talked about it constantly, reliving every moment with joy in his eyes. He'd tell anyone who would listen about the boat ride at sunset, about the restaurants where he and his wife had eaten 50 years before, about walking on the beach with his whole family around him. He'd show people the photo from the boat, pointing out each person, talking about how blessed he felt to have had one more perfect week before his time ran out. The trip had been exactly what he wanted, exactly what he needed, and that knowledge gave me peace even as I watched him fade. He passed away on a Tuesday morning in early spring, with cherry blossoms blooming outside his window, and his wife of 52 years holding his hand. The end was peaceful, which was a mercy. The funeral was large, much larger than I expected, with friends and family coming from all over the country to pay their respects. Apparently, he'd touched a lot of lives over his 74 years. My sister-in-law was there, of course, and she cried extensively, genuinely grieving her father despite everything. I gave her space and focused on supporting my husband through his loss, on being there for my mother-in-law who looked suddenly smaller and older without her partner beside her. At the reception after the funeral, my mother-in-law pulled me aside. He told me something before he died, she said quietly. He said that trip was the best gift anyone ever gave him. He said you made it happen, and even though there was family drama, he got to see that place one more time with all of us together. He wanted me to tell you thank you. I started crying then, really crying, and my mother-in-law hugged me tightly. You're a good woman, she said. I'm lucky to have you as a daughter-in-law. Months later, my sister-in-law showed up at my door wanting to apologize. I considered not answering when I saw her through the window, my hand hovering over the doorknob while I debated just pretending I wasn't home. But my car was in the driveway and she'd clearly seen me. So I opened the door and stood there in the doorway, deliberately not inviting her in, keeping the physical barrier between us. She seemed sincere, I'll give her that. There were genuine tears in her eyes. Her voice was shaking with emotion, and she looked like she'd lost weight, like the stress of everything had taken a physical toll. But I also remembered every single moment of that trip with crystal clarity. Every deliberate exclusion, every calculated move to make me feel like an outsider, every time she'd positioned herself to take what she wanted while pushing me aside. I remembered the hotel lobby, her panic and humiliation, yes, but also her complete lack of remorse in the immediate aftermath, the way she'd tried to paint herself as the victim at the airport. I accept your apology, I said calmly, my voice steady and clear. But it doesn't change anything between us. She looked confused, hurt even. What do you mean? I mean, I believe you're sorry now. I believe you've realized your behavior was wrong, probably because it cost you more than you expected it to. But that doesn't mean we're suddenly going to be close. That doesn't mean I'm going to forget what happened or trust you moving forward. You showed me exactly who you are during that trip, and I'm choosing to believe that truth. You can be your brother's sister, and I can be your brother's wife, and that's enough. That's all we need to be to each other. She walked away looking devastated, got in her car, and drove off, and I closed the door feeling lighter than I had in months, like I'd finally put down a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. A few weeks later, my mother-in-law invited my husband and me on an international trip, just the three of us. We took that trip, and it was beautiful and healing. There was no drama, no exclusions, just three people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. My sister-in-law wasn't on that trip, and she wouldn't be on future trips either. That wasn't cruelty. That was simply the natural consequence of her choices and my boundaries. I'd discovered something important. Boundaries aren't cruelty. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for others is to let people experience the natural consequences of their choices. It was fair, it was deserved, and I'd absolutely do it again.